All right. Just like normal on these live streams, I'm gonna give me like a minute or two to like test things out, make sure everything's working okay. So if you get a bunch of idle time, just skip ahead to when I start doing things. Let me check my video real quick. See if it's coming out okay on the YouTube side of things. Good, that's happening right now. Click it. Okay. Audio volume seems pretty good this time. That's good. Last time I had a bunch of weird audio problems. I also am not sitting in my normal chair because my chair last time was squeaking like absolutely crazy. So I'm using a dining room chair today. Less comfortable for sure, but also quiet, so we'll take it. Video seems to be working okay. As people start populating in the chat, I might say hi to them and see how we're doing. But today's video, for those of you that are wondering, is going to be over supply and demand. Now, this is Unit 1's version of supply and demand, so we're not talking aggregate supply and demand. That is later. In this one, we'll be hitting on what is effectively the most basic version of any of our graphs, which is just the straight up, there is a demand curve and a supply curve, which creates an equilibrium, price and quantity of a good. Various things can affect it. We'll go over just some brief list of things, some acronyms I use in class for stuff like that. Why the graph looks the way it does, how it works, and what to tell off of it. Just like last time, I got a good number of AP exam questions that I can pull from to show you guys how they'll ask about it so that you're better prepared for what the AP exam might ask you. Because conceptually, this is one where yeah, I know how supply and demand works. And then they ask you a question about a thing that changes quantity demanded and not demand, and all my kids miss it. So I'll be going over stuff like that. I'm trying to think of other things. I'll be demoing and testing out a new digital whiteboard software. I do have my physical whiteboard, which I do enjoy using, but I'm going to see if this digital one works out better. I feel like I'll be able to draw on it plenty fine. It's just always writing versus typing. That's kind of an issue for me. And all that stuff. But we'll get started here in a couple of minutes. I don't expect to see a ton of people on this one live just because this is a topic that students aren't as paranoid about as, say, comparative advantage. That's when students are more scared about. Supply and demand is one where they're like, I might mess stuff up, but I'm not really scared of it. All right. So yeah, we'll get started here in a minute or so. Started this one a little bit early. But I think that's about it. I'm trying to think of anything else that's important. Keep an eye on your AP exam schedule, guys. If you're someone who's taking it with my students who are taking it physical copy, that thing's coming up in just under 6 weeks. So hopefully you're making good progress in class. We just got to Unit 4 in mind, so we're probably a little bit behind what I would say most schools are, but that shouldn't hurt us really. We can finish on time. That's not an issue. I'm trying to think of anything else. No, can't think of anything. Oh, this is an important reminder. My next video will not be on Thursday of this week. It will be on Friday of this week. That is because I am getting my second dosage of the Pfizer vaccine for COVID Thursday afternoon. So I will not be able to do the video because it's right in this window when I'm getting the vaccine. So it'll be Friday of this week at 4:30 to 5:30, and that one will cover most of Unit 2, frankly, as much as Unit 2 as I can do in an hour, which is GDP, unemployment, and inflation. I think I fixed it, Judson, or at least I turned it down a bit, so you might still hear clicking, and I'm not sitting in the squeaky chair. So, should be better. I think I figured it out. At least on the streaming side of it, I can turn it down. Don't know if I can change the default gain, though. Let me know if you guys have any problems hearing me, or what you can and can't hear, things like that. Feel free to let me know in the chat. It seemed okay when I was just testing it out, but never know. But yeah, we'll get started here in a second. I'm trying to think of anything else that's important. No, I think we're okay. All right. Well, for those of you that are watching live, good afternoon, everybody. For those of you that watch this later, good whatever time of day it is. Hope you're having a good day. In this video, I'm going to be going over supply and demand, our first of what is a lot of supply and demand graphs that we've got to deal with. Now, this one is the least tested, but not like they can't ask it on the AP exam. It's the smallest percentage chunk on the AP exam in terms of all of the graphs we do. So some teachers, not say skip it, but gloss over it. But if you guys know College Board, you know they'll always sneak in things you didn't think they were going to ask about into your AP exam, and I'd rather you get those right than get those wrong, so let's cover it, because it's going to be fairly simple. I'm going to start off with, again, just a brief overview of the topic, try and summarize all of the big points of it, so we're going to give you like a 30-minute quick review of this chunk of the course, which would normally be like 3 days of lecture for my class, but I'm going to try and do it in 30 minutes, so let's see how that goes. And then about 30 minutes of me going over some practice questions. I made it less questions this time because I remember how long it took me to get through it last time. I didn't like how that video was an hour and 20 minutes. I don't want it to be like that for you guys. But let's get started. Okay, so let's test out this new digital whiteboard thing and see if this works the way I would like it to. Okay. So, yes, I'm using a trial for this because I don't know if it's good or not, so I'm not paying for it yet. Basic overview of supply and demand. How we're talking about and what we're talking about is a market. We're talking about how do we determine how much of a good gets sold and at what price does it get sold at. Like, you walk to the store and you know ramen's cheap. How does that happen? Is it just because it's made out of cheap stuff? Because it's fairly cheap for a lot of companies to make things. That doesn't mean the price correlates with that. Diamonds, from like an actual value standpoint of how rare they are a lot more affordable than what the price they're sold at. I mean, diamonds from a value standpoint should be, like your average wedding ring diamond should be like $120 based off of how common it is. But they don't get charged that because of things like demand, not necessarily supply. So we've got to be careful about which of those is affecting things. So we're talking about markets, and the market is just where it's determined. It's where the buyers and sellers interact. It doesn't have to be a physical place. A lot of the time it's more of like a theoretical / conceptual place of like the oil market. Yes, I buy oil. No, I don't go to the oil store. I just go to the gas station and fill up. And there isn't really a negotiation there. It's more like I need to be able to go to work and I need gasoline to do that. So not all markets are created equal. In this class, though, because it's macro 1, we tend to keep things fairly simple, and we behave and act like most markets are kind of the same, even though in reality they're not. So we've got all these different markets. Now, there's a couple of things that we assume here in econ, at least in macro 1. I'm going to make my camera a little bit bigger because this first chunk is mostly talking. Yeah, let's leave it like that. So when we're talking about these markets, there's a couple of things that we do to simplify them a little bit when it comes to this class. We make them what are called competitive markets, and then we also make them perfect markets. So they're perfectly competitive. A competitive market is a market where there isn't a monopoly, where there are enough buyers and sellers that no one particular seller has complete control over the price, and no one particular buyer can really shift the price in a specific way. So that's a competitive market. A perfectly competitive market is that, plus all the goods are the same quality. So even though, like, if I might say the smartphone market, there are different smartphones of varying degrees of quality. Apple versus Samsung versus Microsoft making their own versus Google. Like, there's a whole bunch of options of various degrees of quality and what you might even ascribe quality to in this context of, like, is it a higher quality because it looks nice, or is it a higher quality because the tech is better, like that kind of thing. Like, in the real world, that market is not perfectly competitive. But in this class, we're going to just say, hey, if it's the smartphone market, assume all smartphones are the same here. If it's the market for apples, even though some apples are good and some apples just taste gross and tart, then cool, we don't care. We're going to keep it simple for the sake of just being, this is your intro into economics. So we're going to keep it kind of simple on that. So we're all dealing with markets. That's how we figure out the price of the good. The market is the house in which supply and demand lives. So, starting with those. Starting with demand first, because that's the simpler of the two. Now, when we're talking about demand, the easiest way to think about it, and again, I'm going to make myself bigger here because I don't really need the whiteboard yet, but I'll leave these little tabs open because these are like these little like small things, bullet points you want to make sure you're getting. When we're talking about demand, we are talking primarily about consumers, obviously, willingness and ability to buy a thing at a given price. I always phrase it as how badly a person wants a good. It's their desire for the good. There does have to be an inherent ability there. It's just, I might not buy anything of a thing I like if the price is too high. So it's at a given price. So demand is how badly I want a good. Again, that is your simplest way of thinking about it. But it's always going to be about price versus quantity. How much of a good I buy based on a current level of price. That gets you to where my students, at least the initial struggles, are when it comes to supply and demand. And I think what is probably the hardest thing in supply and demand is one of the earliest things, and that is the law of supply and the law of demand. So I'll start with the demands first still. The law of demand simply states that the price of an item determines the quantity demanded. That price is tied to quantity. That the amount of a good I buy is based on the price. It's important to understand that what they're talking about there is that it's not tied to how badly I like it, it's tied to the price. The amount of good that I want to buy is based specifically on the price. That at a high price, I don't want to buy very much of any good. At a low price, I would buy amounts of almost any good. It's why you'll have, like the dollar store, have a bunch of random stuff that there's no way you would ever want, but it's like $1, so who cares? That's built entirely off the fact that, like, hey, at low prices, you buy kind of whatever, because who cares? But at high prices, you get very selective about what you're buying. And this applies to a lot of goods. In the real world, does it apply to every good? No. But if a car costs me $20, I'd buy more than one car, right? The problem is that cars cost a hilarious number, and I can barely afford one of those. So the quantity is just one for me on that one. But again, it's based on the price. It's not necessarily based on how badly I want the good, although how badly I want the good will affect the quantity. Like, if I like a good more, and its price is the same as other good that I like, I'll still buy more of the good that I like. That does affect it. But understand that when the price of a good changes, it does not change the demand for that good. That's where people tend to get mixed up. Dr. Pepper goes on sale, it's half its price. I don't like Dr. Pepper more. I don't want Dr. Pepper more. My demand hasn't changed. But would I buy more of it? Probably. If it was half off, I'd probably buy it more often, because it's a lower price now. So my quantity demanded, the amount of the good I'm going to buy, has changed, but my demand for that good has not. So again, demand, how badly I want the good. That didn't change when the price went down. Quantity demanded, the amount of the good I'd like to buy, actually does go up when price changes. Whole thing very confusing for people a lot of the time. Gets easier when we get to the graph, I think. Again, that's the law of demand. Price changes, quantity demanded. I think I can shrink my camera now and actually start graphing some stuff. Boy, howdy do I love graphing. Okay. So that law of demand thing helps us get to what the graph starts to look like. Oh, please tell me I can do this the way I need it to. Come on, I believe in you, you silly, silly software. Yes, it's doing what I wanted it to do. I was testing it earlier, and I was really hoping this was going to not mess up for me on the stream. Okay. So, a supply and demand graph in a market is really built around this visual representation. That font size is a teeny bit small. That's better. Based on this generic layout, that there is the price of the good and that there is the quantity of a good. And by graphing points of amounts people want, you can figure out supply and demand for a thing. General rule of thumb is that demand, for the most part, should be... Oh, what the heck is this? Oh, it's my eraser mark. What the heck? That's interesting. Let's try that again. Okay. See, I knew I'd have fun testing this weird thing out. Too much zoom in, just enough zoom in. All right. We can do this. I believe in me. I believe in us. All right. It can't be that complicated, Mr. McCreachy. It's not. I'm very stupid sometimes. All right. So demand acts as a downward sloping line. The basic idea is that law of demand thing, that at a high price, we wouldn't want very much of the good. At a low price, I would want a hell of a lot of that good. So that's demand, where it's downward sloping, and that's the general look of the graph. Abbreviated with a capital D, bang. That's a tiny d. That'll work, though. When we're talking about supply, behaves the opposite. Supply, because you have to think this is the business's desire to sell a good as opposed to our desire to buy it. They want high prices, we want low prices. So I'm the business, I actually want the highest price possible. So at a low price, I wouldn't want to produce and sell much of my good. At a high price, I would very much like to produce and sell that good. This is in a vacuum, so if you're like, well, don't some goods sell for more than others, Mr. Ricci? Absolutely they do. You are super right. That is not incorrect. But every business would like to sell their good for more money. I mean, Nestle charges money for water, right? Like a thing that we actually need to live, you have to pay for, which is true for kind of everything. But like, you literally can't make it like more than 3 days without water. So that's one of those where like demand should be very high. They don't charge infinite, but they do charge for it. Now, when we're talking this supply and demand idea, that we have this upward sloping supply curve. Oh, and to be clear, the law of supply is just the same as the law of demand, where its price changes quantity supplied. At a low price, businesses' ability to produce isn't higher or lower. It's just the amount of the good that they would like to produce that is higher or lower. So the quantity is the literal number of the thing that they're going to make. They're not going to make very much of the thing at a low price because it can't make them a lot of money. But at a very high price, they would make a freaking ton of the thing because it makes them a lot of money. Supply, again, is their overall desire to sell. Now, that's an important clarification, actually. I should maybe focus a little more on that. A thing people mess up is that they think the supply of a thing is literally the supply of the thing, which you're like, well, that's... What I mean by that is people tend to believe the supply of a good is the actual amount of the good that is produced. Like when we say the supply of oil, it's the amount of oil that exists. No. In this class, and in economic terms, when we're talking about supply, it is the desire and ability of businesses to produce and sell their good. Basically, it's how badly they want to make and sell it. It is not the amount of it, it's how badly they want to get rid of it, to make it and then sell it. Same way that demand is how badly we want to buy it. Demand is not the amount of the thing we want to buy, it's how badly we want to buy the thing. Supply works the exact same way. Now, this graph is built off of these two principles, these sort of opposing forces, that we want to buy a certain amount of a thing, that businesses want to produce a certain amount of a thing, and that there has to be some happy medium, some layout where we get to a spot where both of us are satisfied. And that's this right here. That's our equilibrium point. We're at that equilibrium. Can I make it a dotted line? I don't think I could. I'll make it a different color. We're at this equilibrium, which on my graph should be dotted. I can't make it dotted here, so just, imagine it's a dotted line. Right, that equilibrium, we have this like perfect price and quantity. That whatever this price is and whatever that quantity is the perfect price and / or quantity of that good. That is the exact amount that if they put the price here, people would buy the exact amount that businesses produce. They would buy the exact amount that businesses would produce. That's ideal, right? The business doesn't want to have a bunch left over in the stock. The people don't want to run out of the good they want to buy. You get a nice happy medium. But whenever things change, your equilibrium changes, and that changes where your market should end up. So what I mean by that is, can I just erase the entire line? Nope, makes me erase chunks. Fine. I can just undo it. What am I talking about? Whenever you change things, whenever the economy shifts and moves and gets manipulated, then your equilibrium changes, which changes what the price and quantity should be, right? So say people want the good more. This is very common, very logical. Let's go straight up. GameStop stock, good example. That there is a large increase in the demand for it because people want it more. Yes, I can do an arrow. Gotta love that. Now my demand is much higher, which means my equilibrium point is also higher. I've got a higher equilibrium price and a higher equilibrium quantity. Cool. That means that this market is moving upwards, at least from a price standpoint. The reason why I want to mention that is because a lot of times people will get stuck in the weeds of like, well, the price has gone up. People won't want to buy it as much. It's like, no. You're getting order wrong on this. Where people wanted to buy it more, which means the price is going to start to rise. Because if you're a business owner and you can tell people really, 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 really want your good, what should you do to the price of it? You should raise it. They want it more. They're buying more and more and more of it. I'm going to start charging more. And we'll get to a nice, happy spot. I can produce more of it as a business because I'm making more money. So my quantity is going up on that end. People are buying more of it because they want it more. So the quantity is going up on that end. And price is rising because of this positive influence on it. So that's what a graph shift is like for this supply and demand thing. And it's how it'll work on every single graph, is that you'll have some force, some scenario pressuring one of the lines, pushing them a particular way. Supply or demand, left or right. Rightward shift is always an increase. A leftward shift is always a decrease. Because if I'm imagining like a straight line across this thing, which I'm going to erase this almost immediately after, but I'll draw it for this sake. If I imagine that line across, you can see that here versus here, I have a significantly higher quantity at this spot than at that spot. Same price, much higher quantity. And that applies to every single spot on that orange line. Okay, now I kind of skipped over this part. The graph can shift. There are a bunch of things that can do it. To keep it as simple as possible for you, to not like make you have to write down an insane list of things like I did for my students. If it affects how badly people want to buy a thing, it's demand. If it affects how much businesses are going to produce of a thing, it's supply. Because it's based off perspective. Supply is all producer perspective, demand is all consumer perspective. So if the scenario you're given is framed around one of those two groups, which most of the time it is to keep things nice and simple, then it'll affect demand or supply depending on the group. If it's telling you, hey, this is the market for apples, and consumers read that pesticides have increased risk of cancer associated with them, that the pesticides used in apples have an increased risk of cancer with them. Okay, who cares about that? The consumers are the producers. That's definitely a consumer issue because the scenario I gave you said that consumers find this out. It could also be like the pessimist who says in the real world that like businesses wouldn't super care about that. They don't always. I mean, there's a whole bunch of regulations that businesses have to deal with because they specifically didn't care about these things before. Read The Jungle if you want to know how businesses don't care about their workers sometimes. But the basic idea would be, okay, people don't want to get cancer, probably. That seems pretty unlikely. So they won't want apples as much. Demand is the line I'd be moving, and I'd shift it to the left. For any of you that are wondering why did I make the line smaller when I did that, it's because I didn't want to keep drawing it over this way. Technically speaking, I could, but also technically speaking, these lines are curved at the ends, and I don't draw that either. So as a means of keeping the graph simple, I just make it a little bit smaller. That's not necessary. It's just a thing I do. But a leftward shift is a decrease. If people want apples less, if I'm the apple company, I'm like, ah, dang it, they found out about the cancer apples. All right, we got to charge less for these apples because they're not going to want to buy them because they give you cancer. It's like, yep, they do charge you less. People would still buy less, even if it's cheaper. They're still not going to buy as many as before because the apples literally give you cancer. You shouldn't buy them. It should be zero. Some people will still buy them because cheap. Some people will still buy them because cheap. I mean, like, that's the whole thing. People will buy like less safe products because they're cheap all the time. We are not always smart when it comes to consumption habits. Okay. Now, if you need a stronger list of shifters, listen up. I'll give you the stronger list of shifters. They are tied to two acronyms. I really don't want to type them on the screen because I worry about which part of this thing gets screenshotted for YouTube, and I can change it, but it's not as easy as it should be for me to do that. So for demand, the acronym that I use for my students is TRIPE, T-R-I-P-E. T is for taste and preferences. How badly you want a thing is based on stuff like popularity. That's taste and preferences. R is for related goods. That's some vocab stuff like substitutes and complements, which are just goods that people use in place of or with one another. So things like chips and salsa. Yeah, cigarettes. We can actually use cigarettes with that cancer example, obviously, but they've gone down. Demand has gone down. Sorry, responding to the chat. When we're talking about substitutes and complements, think substitutes are like Ruffles and Lay's. Potato chips that are fairly similar. I know you might have a personal stance on that argument, but they're pretty similar. So if the price of one went down, the demand for the other would go down. If Lay's got cheaper, people would want Ruffles less because you'd get Lay's instead. You don't need both. if they're complements their goods used together. I always use chips and salsa for this one, or chips and queso because we live in Texas. But chips and salsa, cool. Salsa's more expensive. I buy less tortilla chips, right? That's still supply and demand. That's still demand in this case because, again, that's a consumer thing. Producer doesn't care super much about that. It will impact them for sure, but does it affect their ability to make things? No. Does it affect my desire for this stuff? For sure. The I in tripe is income. The more money you have, the more of certain goods you buy and the less of other goods you buy. These are inferior and normal goods. Normal goods, you have more money, you buy more of. Think high quality stuff like steak or a laptop or something like that. Where you have more money, you would demand more of them. And if you have less money, you would demand more inferior goods, which are your cheaper products, your stuff that you can use in as like your cheaper options. Think like Great Value / Walmart brand products. Those are all inferior goods. P, population, more people, more demand. That's easy. And then E, expectations. If you think prices are going to go down in the future, you don't want to buy stuff as much right now. Each of those scenarios on their own, you could probably have figured out what happens to demand. Again, as long as you understand that demand is how badly people want of a good, you look at a scenario and be like, would people want the good more or less now? That's all you're really asking yourself for what happens to demand in this scenario. For supply, again, it's business's ability to produce things. For this acronym, I use CEPPIN, CEPPIN. My students, I then tell them about a different way to do it, which is NICEPP, or NICEPP, which is fine if it helps you remember it, but it's people never remember what that acronym stands for. They just like to write down NICEPP, which is great. Gotta love it. But that one is natural or man-made phenomena, so like a flood would hurt your ability to produce things, a hurricane would hurt your ability to produce things, stuff like that. I is input costs, stuff that affects how much it costs you to produce things. Like almost every company uses oil to ship their products, so if oil prices go up, it's harder for you to make stuff. Remember, it's willingness and ability to produce for supply, so supply goes down. The 2 P's are about profitability. The basic idea is that businesses will want to make whatever good makes them the most money. So if Ford found that trucks are more profitable than Mustangs, they would make more trucks and fewer Mustangs. They would want to make more trucks and want to make fewer Mustangs. So like supplies of those would shift to make sense of that. Both P's are profitability of different things. You can figure that one out. I went out of order. C is competition. More producers, more supply. If there's more people making the good, there's a greater overall desire to produce the good because there's more people. And then E is expectations here again, and that one works kind of the same, except businesses want to make the most money. So if they expect prices to go up in the future, they supply less now because they don't want to produce it right now. They want to produce it in the future when it would make them more money. That's the idea for the 2 like lists of shifters. Don't sweat them too much. If you want to go back in the video and grab them, they're not that complicated. All right. Almost done. I got like 5 minutes left. That's enough time to nail this. Okay. So the last 2 things here that are the important things: simultaneous shifts and disequilibrium. So let's see if I'll do the disequilibrium. I'll do simultaneous shifts first. So what happens if both change? Can happen. You don't really get scenarios that do that. You could, like in the real world, have scenarios that change both. It's just on the AP exam to keep things simple. They tend to make it so that it is a 1 scenario, 1 shift rule. Meaning if you get a statement that just says one thing is happening, it's just supply or demand. It's not both. If they give you 2 things happening, this and this, or both this and this happen, then you might have to move both lines. So say we're sticking with the Apple market. There is still that cancer thing. However, the price of land is going down, meaning it's easier for businesses and agricultural companies and farmers to acquire land to farm. Producer or consumer? Well, if I'm thinking it's the market for apples, the farmers are the producers of the apples, and if land is cheaper, it makes it easier for them to produce things. So that would increase the supply. Like that. And if we still have this whole cancer thing, which sucks real bad, and we don't like that, but I made the hypothetical, so it's my fault if this happens, that would still decrease the demand curve. So we got these two things happening at the same time. Now this is the other thing that I think is kind of hard for students to get in terms of like what's happening now to the price and the quantity of this good. Because what you're always trying to figure out is, okay, scenario happens, what happens to the price and the quantity? Okay, I can tell the price for sure goes down. I started, right, marker, and I'm going to use green. I started there. That's a great circle. And I ended down here. Right, that's where S and D meet. This is where the new supply and demand lines meet. So I moved downward. My price for sure went down. If it's cheaper for businesses to make a thing and people want a thing less, each of those individually make the good cheaper. Both of them happening for sure make the good cheaper. But the quantity, at least in my drawing, looks like it didn't really change very much, or not at all. The answer for what happened to the quantity there is actually indeterminate. I don't know for sure what's going to happen to my quantity. I know that if it's cheaper for them to produce it, they can produce more. I know if it gives you cancer, we won't want to buy it as much. But then do they sell as much? Because it's cheaper to produce. They can produce more of it for sure at a much lower cost. The price is going to be super crazy low. So even if it doesn't give you even if it gives you cancer, people still might buy the same amount of it, if not more, if it's so cheap. If an apple costs a penny, people might not care because you could not starve. You get cancer, but starving's a more pressing concern. So what would happen to the quantity here? I actually can't tell. It could go down. It probably should go down based on the cancer scenario, but in general, if this happens, I couldn't tell you if it goes down, if it goes up, or if it ends up in the same space. It kind of depends on how you draw it for you to be able to tell. But if you're ever moving both lines, something is going to be indeterminate. You're not going to be able to tell what happens to one of the two. Visually, you'll be able to look at it, but based on how these shifts work, supply increasing gives me a higher quantity, demand decreasing gives me a lower quantity. What happens if I do both? I don't know. Because I don't know how much I'm moving supply and demand by in these problems. You aren't ever going to, which is actually not bad. It's a lot easier to deal with since they don't tell you how much to shift them by. So that's a simultaneous shift. If you ever shift both lines, which they have to give you two scenarios for that, something's going to be indeterminate. That's something that's not going to be able to be figured out. You'll have a visual for it, so I'd say hey, it didn't change. But I wouldn't write it didn't change. I'd be like, wait a minute, I moved two lines. Price did go down. It moved down for sure. But when I increase supply, I get a higher quantity. When I decrease demand, I get a lower quantity. That one I don't know what happens to. That's your indeterminate thing. And last bit, disequilibrium. What happens if you're not where you're supposed to be? This has to be pointed out to you by a question saying that either this economy is not at equilibrium or this economy is at a certain price that is above or below it. But let's say we're above it. Well, that's a good line. This is why I was using the line function. So let's say we're at this price right here. Let's call it $7. Let's call the equilibrium price $5. Whoa. I started to draw a 5 and then I started to draw 3. I am tired. Okay. So 7 is the price. 5 is what the price should be. Price is too high. I can tell that just based off of how numbers work. But graphically, what's going on? Well, graphically, I'm right up here, which is to say I'm at two spots. I'm not at one spot. I'm hitting two different spots on my graph, right? I'm hitting that spot on my demand curve, that spot on my supply curve. On my demand curve, the quantity is lower than what it would be at equilibrium, which makes sense. The price is too high. People don't want to buy it. But here on my supply curve, my quantity is higher than what it would be at equilibrium because businesses want to make as much money as possible. They would, in a vacuum, love to charge $7 for this thing. Now, it would also allow them to produce more of it. Now, what this is creating is disequilibrium, yes, but it's also creating a specific vocabulary thing. If my price is too high, I've got a surplus. I'm drawing this with my mouse, so this is not good handwriting. That's actually not too bad based on how my handwriting normally looks. It's a surplus. I've got too much of the good. If the price is too high, think about who that benefits. The price is too high, I mean, the businesses would like that. It's okay, so people wouldn't? Great. If the price is too high and we don't want it, there's going to be a bunch of it left over. That would be a surplus. Price is too high, you get a surplus. If the price is too low, say the price is at $3, we want this thing a lot. That's great. That we'll buy a ton of that. And if the price is over here, businesses won't really like producing that. That's not going to make them very much money. That is called a shortage. And those are your two types of disequilibrium. Either a surplus or a shortage. It actually feels pretty good writing with this marker thing. So we got a surplus up top, we got a shortage down below. What you should know about both of these is that over time they go away. If the business acts like logically. If you're having a surplus, that means that you're going to have a bunch of the good left on the shelf. A business is going to realize that and be like, okay, we should discount that thing. We should put it on sale or on clearance, which, to be clear, they're just lowering the price, which will eventually get them back to equilibrium. They'll be like, okay, let's charge $6 for it, and we still got some left over. Okay, let's charge $5 for it, and it's gone. Perfect. They charge $3 for it. There's a bunch of people who are very pissed and angry at the manager and yelling at them that they couldn't get the good. Okay, let's charge more so we can make more of it. Okay, so we'll charge $4. Less people will be mad at them because now it's $4 and more of them are getting the good they want. Okay, let's charge a little bit more. Okay, they charge $5 for it. Everybody who wanted one got one. So over time, disequilibrium goes away. As long as businesses act logically and rationally, which we are assuming, it is an assumption, it's not a thing that always happens, then they will get back to equilibrium over time. Okay, that is your brief, I say brief, it was like 30 minutes. Your brief overview of the supply and demand stuff. Did I hit on everything perfectly? No, I hit on most of it. If you want the full thing, watch the supply and demand videos. They're much longer because I give a lot of detail and there's a lot of PowerPoint slides that tell you what things to write down if you want to write them. My kids in my class already wrote them all down and they already have the trauma from it. But now let's look at AP Classroom. Let's look at some questions and see exactly how this stuff looks on a test and if we can figure it out. Okay, supply and demand. Here we go. Assume that the market for bottled water is in equilibrium. Great, gotta love it. I'm gonna draw this on my thing so I can just pan over and not have to try and draw two things at the same time and alt tab a lot. So we're at equilibrium. That is great. It is bottled water. So I was just talking about Nestle and all their weird stuff. So we're here. If both the supply of and the demand for, great, bottled water decrease, what'll happen to price and quantity? Okay, decreasing both. So we decrease the supply of something and we decrease the demand of something. If I decrease the demand, it means people want the good less, okay? And if I decrease the supply, it means businesses are wanting to produce the good less than before. If I were to draw this graphically while still like not really crossing over my axes, which is just me being like kind of lazy to be honest, but whatever. Oh wait, there's that line. There we go. Okay, should look something like this. Where supply is shifted left and demand is shifted left, and again left is decrease, right is increase. Do not think about it as up and down, you will mess it up. Left and right, that's all we're talking about. So supply and demand both decrease. All right, I'm looking at my equilibrium point, my new one, compared to my old one. My quantity at this new one, at this red equilibrium point, there we go, is a lot lower than that one, right? There was this quantity here, and now there is this new quantity over here, and I know how graphs work and x values work. I know that this red one is a lower number quantitatively than whatever this green one was, so my quantity has for sure gone down. What about my price? Looks like on my drawing that my price hasn't changed, but that's because of how I drew it. When you decrease supply, price goes up, because if it's harder for a business to make a thing, they'll start charging more for the thing, right? But when demand goes down, prices go down, because if I don't want a good, I won't pay as much for it, right? But both are happening. I don't want the good, and the business's ability to produce it is being hurt. So what happens to the price? I don't know. I do not know what happens to the price. If one of these answers said doesn't change, I might think about it for a second because it looked like it didn't change on my drawing. But I actually don't know what happened to it because it could have gone up, it could have gone down depending on how much supply and demand changed by, because we don't know how much supply and demand are changing by here. I can't assume they're changing by the same amount. So it has to be E. My price is indeterminate, couldn't tell you. my quantity decreases. Again, if you're moving both lines, something has got to be indeterminate. That's a thing worthwhile to write down. If you move both lines, something is going to be indeterminate. If you move in the same direction, like left or right, then my price becomes indeterminate. If I move them in opposing directions, then it's quantity. All right. Number 2. If there's a decrease in the price of coffee beans used to make brewed coffee, how will this affect equilibrium price and quantity of brewed coffee? Okay, here's a question about coffee. I got to think what happens in this market. All right, I see they're asking about price and quantity again, so they're asking about equilibrium, but this is only one scenario, so there should only be one shift. It's a decrease in the price of coffee beans used to make brewed coffee. Who cares about this? The consumers or the producers of coffee? Okay, so coffee beans are cheaper. Price of brewed coffee is getting cheaper. Okay? That would mean... Oh, the price of coffee beans is cheaper. So, got it. That is affecting the producer side of it. If I were to go down my acronyms, this is an input cost, a thing that goes into the amount it takes to produce something. Okay, how much it costs you to make a good. If it costs you less to make a good, you could make more of the good. Who makes the goods? Businesses. Also, who makes the goods? They're making more of the good. Supply is going up. Supply is the ability and desire to produce a thing. I said like twice in that businesses are going to be producing more of the coffee. So supply should increase. Shifting it right. So if supply is increasing, they can make more coffee. It's cheaper for them to make coffee. Well, if it's cheaper for them to make coffee, it'll be cheaper for us to buy it because it costs them less to make it. They can make more of it, which means they'll charge less for it. If it's easier for them to make it, they'll usually pass that benefit on to consumers. Again, this is an assumption. It's a very nice thing to assume. But if it gets really easy for businesses to make the thing, they'll start making more of it. And if they make more of it and we want it the same, they're going to have to charge less for it for us to buy it. So boom. I get my price drops, my quantity rises, equilibrium price will decrease, and equilibrium quantity will increase. A. 3. Numbers. Hard to read those. I tried to zoom it in. It literally wouldn't let me, which is very cool. The table above shows the quantity demanded and the quantity supplied for bushels of wheat at various prices. Which of the following combinations is the equilibrium? The idea being at a low price, remember that there would be a fairly high quantity demanded. At a high price, there would be a fairly low quantity demanded. And the opposite for supply. Equilibrium is where they line up. It's where they match, where the quantity supplied equals the quantity demanded. So based on this table, right here, 150 and 20,000 bushels of wheat is their equilibrium. Because if you think about the graph, think about how at that one spot, there is only one quantity. If I'm at any other price, then I've got multiple quantities because they would intersect multiple times with the line. Like, I'm drawing the lines right across here. I get 1x value. I draw a line across here. I got 2 spots now that I'm connecting at. I draw it down here. Oh, yep, there's 2 again. I'm only looking for one quantity because I'm at equilibrium. So where do I get one quantity at? At $1.50. If the price was $2, you can see that people would only want to buy 10,000 of it, and that businesses would want to produce 40,000 of it. So there would be a pretty massive surplus. There'd be a heck of a lot of the good that people are not buying. And if it was down here at 75 cents, people would want to buy 35,000 of it. Businesses would only be able to produce 5K of it. So there'd be 30,000 orders that couldn't be filled. So that'd be a shortage. Number 4. Here we go. It's 2 questions connected here based off of this visual. We've got 2 demand curves, D1 and D2, and 2 points, X and Y, along D1. Okay. Which of the following changes will most likely cause a shift of the demand curve from D1 to D2? Again, a shift of the demand curve means people want the good more. A shift along this curve, going from like point X to Y, we'll get to in a second. So what gets us to go from D1 to D2? A thing that tends to mess people up here is they pick E, a decrease in the price of video games. This is the market for video games. They're like, hey, If video games are cheaper, people will want them more. No. I don't want video games more when they're cheaper. I do buy more of them. Those are different ideas, even if it doesn't feel very different. Here's an easier way to figure it out with the graph. This is the price of video games. They said that went down. That doesn't move this line to this line. They're literally telling me whatever the price was before is now lower. So X to Y would be decreasing the price of video games. Because if I was here and video games are now cheaper, okay, well, that's the Y value. I am now at a lower Y value. Okay, that would get me to that. So it's not E. That's the trap one. Increase in consumers' income, assuming that video games are a normal good. I've got more money. Video games are a normal good. I'd want more of them. D1 to D2. Regardless of the video game itself, regardless of whatever price it was at before, me having more money tells me I want / ability, because it's willingness and ability. This is definitely helping my ability, is going up. D1 to D2. Increase in the price of game consoles, so A works. Increase in the price of game consoles, a complementary good. If game consoles are more expensive, I wouldn't want video games as much, so it would decrease my demand. Decrease in the price of mobile games, a substitute good. If mobile games were cheaper, I'd buy more of those, and I wouldn't want regular video games as much because they are filling that hole in my heart. And then D, a decreased number of buyers in the market. Again, less buyers means there's a less total amount of demand, so no. B, C, and D all decrease demand. E moves you from X to Y. A moves you from D1 to D2. I already mentioned this because 5 is asking you from X to Y. How do you get there? Again, a decrease in price. Because if I lower the price, I was here, and now I am here. At a lower price, I would purchase a higher quantity of video games. My overall desire for them has stayed the same, but I would buy more at a lower price. 6. This graph, this one scares people. I like using this one. So we got supply and demand and a whole bunch of numbers, and look at all these dotted lines. My eyes hurt. All right, at the price of P0, right here. P0, so like focus on that dot and that dot. What's going on? Okay, well my price is lower than what it is supposed to be. All right, I gotta think, who's that benefiting? Low price benefits consumers, generally speaking. So if I'm thinking, is this gonna be a shortage or a surplus? A shortage would happen if consumers are doing great, right? Because if consumers are buying all of the good, then the good would run out. So this is a shortage. The price is too low. If I need the graph to help me with that, at P0, I've got 45 as my quantity on my supply curve. So it means there's 45 of the good being produced. People want to buy because it's on the demand curve. 75 of the thing. Yikes, that's super awkward. So I've got a shortage of 30. Now, it says shortage in the market cause upward pressure on prices until equilibrium is reached at 30 units. My equilibrium isn't at 30. My equilibrium would be at 60. And it says upward pressure, yes. If you have a shortage, prices should start pushing up, should start rising, because the businesses should raise the prices to get them to produce more and people to buy less, because they actually do want people to buy less here. So it would be D. There's a shortage in the market, yes, because the price is too low. Prices should start to go up, yes, until equilibrium is reached at 60, yes. 7, same visual, different question. At P2, what is happening? Question is technically a little bit, the answer is a little bit different. It says surpluses and shortages, but it says how much will be exchanged, meaning how much is getting bought. So I'm at P2 here. The price is too high. That would be a surplus. If the price is too high, there's going to be a hell of a lot of the thing on the shelf still. How much on the shelf? Well, they're going to make 90 of it. People are going to want 30 of it. Yikes. How much of a surplus is happening then? 60, right? There's a surplus of 60. But how much is being actually bought? 90 or 30 or 60? Think about it. It's 30. It's 30 because people want 30. We're not going to buy more than what we're wanting. It's a surplus because people didn't buy enough, right? The problem is that they didn't exchange 90. If they did, then there wouldn't be a surplus. They would have sold exactly the amount that they produced. But If it's at 30, then we know. Because if they're at 30, like, uh-oh, we didn't sell everything. We've got a bunch left over. Oh, so the answer is there is a surplus of 60 units. And how many are being exchanged? 30. Okay, last thing. Only FRQ I've ever seen on supply and demand. Which again, I tell my students all the time because students will always believe this. They always think that their group is the one with the worst luck. You guys might be accurate because of COVID, so maybe you're right. But like probably people back in like the dark ages had it worse than you, you know. But College Board, for the most part, kind of hates you guys and wants to make your guys' life really hard. So maybe you get a supply and demand FRQ, which is just not common, but not impossible. So we got gasoline sold in a competitive market. Equilibrium price is $50 and equilibrium quantity is 1,000. They want you to draw it. Okay, it's just a supply and demand graph for gasoline. All you would need to draw to get all of the points is this. All of about 2 seconds to draw. Supply, demand, price, quantity. My X at equilibrium is 1,000. They mentioned there's 1,000 barrels at that amount. And then the price is 50. Told me both of those things. I would label both of those things because they told me that. If they tell you a number, use the number. Especially if it's a thing on your axis, because you can show that. That's my equilibrium quantity. That's my equilibrium price. There you go. B, at a price of 40, is there a surplus or a shortage? And explain. Okay, well, my price is 50. 40 would be below. All right. You don't have to draw it. It doesn't say to draw it, but I'm going to draw it. I wouldn't draw it on your drawing, but just imagine that you're like visually looking at it. Okay, the price is too low. I got this much being demanded. I got this much being supplied. I don't know what the numbers are, but I know based off how x-axes work that that number is greater than that number. People want more than what businesses are producing. That'd be a shortage. And you could probably get away with saying because the price is below the equilibrium price, but I don't think that's enough. I think you would have to say, because at that low price, the quantity demanded will exceed the quantity supplied, or in like normal words, people will want to buy more than what businesses will want to produce. That would create a shortage. C, assume new oil wells are discovered. On your graph from part A, show how this change would affect your equilibrium price and quantity. If a question ever asks you to show a thing on the AP exam, be aware that means you have to draw it. You're going to visually do it. You're not going to verbally do it. So new oil wells are discovered. Supply or demand, who cares? Businesses or consumers. Okay, as a consumer, I'm like, new oil wells are discovered. I'm like, all right, good for them. If I'm a producer who makes oil, if I'm a person who makes oil, and they discover a bunch of new oil wells, that makes things very different for me. There's more oil wells? So there's more oil, so I can, or more gasoline or whatever, so I can produce more gasoline? Nice. Supply goes up. They've made it easier to produce. Technically, you could probably label this as a natural / man-made phenomenon because they found it, but you could also say input costs because if there's more oil and gasoline production is cheaper. You could explain that more than one way. For showing it, here's how I would show it. You increase the supply curve because there's more. It's easier for them to produce gasoline now, which will lower the price and increase the quantity. Because if there's more of it available, so the quantity's going up. If there's more of it available, though, and we want it the same, because we do want it the same, our demand for it didn't change at all, they would have to lower the price. That's why whenever more oil is discovered, you see gasoline prices go down. That is a real world thing that happens enough times that I think you could figure that out. D says, assume instead there is an increase in the price of gasoline-operated automobiles. How will this affect that market? And explain it. This one is verbal, so I move myself so you can see it. This one is verbal, does not say show. I do not draw D. I actually have to write what's happening for D. Okay, increase in the price of gas-powered cars. If I'm a producer of gasoline, that doesn't technically matter for me. If I'm a consumer, if I'm someone who buys and pays for gas, this does matter to me because I use the car. Yikes. So my car is more expensive. I wouldn't, at least gas-powered cars. So what would I do? I probably wouldn't want to buy gas-powered cars as much, or I'd want to buy cars with better gas mileage. What's happening is I'm demanding less gasoline. This is technically a complementary good. It's a good that uses this good. So if it's gas prices are going up, or sorry, gas guzzling cars are getting more expensive, I will not want to use gas-powered cars as much. I might, splurge on a Tesla if I could afford it, or whatever. So how will that affect the market? Demand, because it's consumers that be affected there, should go down. Because if it's a complementary good, if it's a good that is being used with it, people will want that other good less. If gas-powered cars are now more expensive to operate, more expensive period, I will not want gasoline as much. Because I'll end up trying to buy electric-powered car instead. So demand will go down. E, if both of those things happen, if C and D both happen, what happens to price and quantity? Okay, I am actually going to draw it, even though it doesn't tell me to. And technically speaking, you wouldn't draw it, it just asks you to verbally do it, but man, on those types of questions, would I still probably want to draw it, and I don't think they would take off points if you did. Demand is decreasing. Supply is increasing, so this is my movement right here. I get to this new purple equilibrium at the bottom. Compared to my original equilibrium, what is happening to my price and quantity? Okay, we want a thing less, businesses want to produce more of it. Okay, price is for sure going to fall. Right, both of those cases, this is technically the same as the cancer thing. Both of those things happening individually would cause the price to go down. So them both happening just causes the price to go down by a lot. Quantity, though. Okay, I don't want gasoline as much. Businesses are going to produce more of it, which is going to make it cheaper for me. Oh, what happens to the quantity? I don't know. I do not know. I don't know what happens to it. Based on my drawing, it looks like on the purple spot, the quantity would have gone down compared to my original. On the green one, my quantity went up from the original. They both happened indeterminate. Indeterminate. Do not write it didn't change. Because I don't know if it didn't change or not either. If they both happened at the exact same amount, if supply and demand both changed by the numerically same amount, supply and demand exact same, then it would be no change. But I couldn't guarantee you that. I couldn't tell you based on anything here that these are going to be the exact same amount of change for supply and demand. Because I don't know, how much oil was discovered, how much more expensive are gas-powered cars, and how affordable are electric cars. I don't know enough context to know how much supply and demand are changed by here. I just know that they're both changing. And I know that if supply goes up, my quantity should go up, and if demand goes down, quantity should go down, and they both happened. So I actually don't know what's happening to quantity. So my answer for E would be that the equilibrium price will fall. It doesn't say to explain this, which is nice. I'll say the equilibrium price will fall, and the quantity is indeterminate, or cannot be determined, or you can't know based on current information. Those are all options here. Okay. That is actually it for supply and demand. It's a relatively smaller topic from how much the AP exam emphasizes it. Although if you know how this topic works, it does help you a lot with future graphs. It helps you understand the aggregate supply and demand graph a lot if you know how all the graph mechanics work. It helps you understand, frankly, every graph. Loanable funds market graph, money market graph, even if visually some of those look a little bit different, they still kind of behave the same of hey, there is an equilibrium that you're trying to get to that you should be getting to over time kind of anyway. That when you move the line, it changes that equilibrium and it changes what your X and Y are supposed to be at equilibrium, which changes how your economy works. In this case, it just changes how it works for one particular good. For your later graphs, it changes kind of everything. So that is basically it for supply and demand. I think I'm trying to make sure that I didn't miss anything important. I don't think so. I did skim over the OG supply and demand stuff, so if you need to look back through those notes, if you're one of my students, if you're not, if you want to go and look at my full lecture videos on that, which were long for sure, but it's because I use a lot of examples. Absolutely feel free to do so. Again, and this is a reminder, my next video will not be on Thursday. It will be on Friday, and I'll go over Unit 2. As much of it as I can in about an hour. I'm probably going to go over time on that one because I'm going to try and hit literally all of Unit 2, which is GDP, unemployment, and inflation. And it's the majority of formulas in the course. Most of the math in the course is in that unit. I'm not going to teach you how to do math, but I'll show you how the formulas work and how they're used and stuff like that. I can't fix that problem for you via live stream review video, but I can try to explain how all of the math works on its own. Trying to think of anything else that matters important wise. No, I think that is just about it. If you guys have any questions for me, as always, feel free to type them in the chat if you're watching live, leave them in the comments if you're watching recorded, or if you're one of my students, feel free to email me that question. Generally, it's better if you comment it. That way it's there permanently and people can see my response to it, because I do see your comments and I can very easily go back, comment, replies to them and help you guys out. But I believe that is it. Thank you all for watching. Really do appreciate this as always. I had less people this time, but I know that this is an easier concept for people, so they don't always tune into this one. And they for sure forgot about it. But thank you all for watching as always. Wish you all the best of luck and have a great rest of